So there's lots of occasions in embroidery where you might want to stitch some leaves. So I'm going to show you 10 stitches that are good for leaves, starting with the easiest, and I'll make a free PDF download of this design for you, and you can get that from the website by clicking the link in the description below. So we have lots of videos about how to get going in your embroidery, how to frame up your fabric, how to thread your needles. We'll put a playlist to that at the end of this video, so you can check that out there. So I'm just going to start by working a stem in a back stitch. So I've just gone all the way to the end with my running stitch, and now we're going to put our first detached chain on. So I'm coming up on that point there, just mark with a little dot, and back down the same hole or very near to it, doesn't have to be exactly, making a loop, come up inside that loop, pull it so it makes a chain, and then to finish that stitch just down on the outside of the loop. Just going to work my way down one side. So up and down the same point, make a loop up inside the loop just away from the stem, and then that holding stitch will attach the leaf to the stem. So this is nice if you want some really small leaves, and it kind of makes a whole set of them. Just detach chains all the way down one side. One more on the end, just come down one side and up the other side just to finish my little leaf off. One more detached chain, like so, just attach it to the branch. As simple as that. So detached chains. I'm going to start at the tip of my leaf and just make a little stitch on the point. Now I can work my fly stitches either side. So I'm going to come up on the line on one side, down on the other, up at the end of that first stitch and inside that loop. So it's very much like the detached chain, but it's wider at the top. Pull that tight. Take a stitch over the end to secure it in place. Up on one side, down on the other. Make a loop up inside the loop at the end of the previous stitch. Pull it tight, finish off the stitch. If you want to know what threads that I'm using, they're all on the download, so go over to the website, check that out, so you can see what threads and how many strands I'm using. Just going to work my way all the way down this leaf, keeping that nice sharp angle on my fly stitches, and that middle stitch will make the stem automatically, so you don't need to think about that. So fly stitches all the way down to the base of the leaf. Right, so just put the last stitch down into that point. So I'm going to do exactly the same now for the other two leaves. Okay, so just on my last stitch of the third leaf now, take them right into the middle. And I'm just going to stitch a little stem to join those up. I think we'll do a stem stitch. So forward stitch, make a loop halfway up through the loop, Just keep the loop on the same side. Just make that little stem for those leaves to attach to. And one more stitch, and I'll just finish that by weaving it under on the back. So that's a fly stitch leaf. So I'm going to start this leaf with my stem first. I'll just use the stem stitch like I did previously, because I'm going to work up around the leaf here, so I'm kind of heading into it. I'll do my stem first. So just a stem stitch up to the base of the leaf, like so. Then I'm going to do the buttonhole. So this also involves a loop, and I'm going to do the edge in the middle. So I'm putting my stitches at a slight angle, so they look more like the veins of a leaf, making a loop, come back up inside the loop, near to the middle, not exactly on that middle line. You'll see that it makes this edge that will form the vein down the centre. So needle goes down on the outside of the shape, make my loop up on the inside, just to the inside of that centre line, tension it towards the middle. And I draw my design on with a water-soluble pen, so that if you see any lines I can easily get rid of those afterwards. I'm not worried about those. I'm just going to work all the way up into the point in the same way, just keeping that angle on there as you work your way up. Put the last one right in that point. And then just to secure that down over the end, so that doesn't come undone. Now you can either work your way back down the other side, but I find it a little bit easier to go back to the bottom and work my way up. I think it's a bit neater, so I'm just going to walk that thread down, a little stitch in the middle just to secure it so there isn't a big long stitch on the back, and then I'm going to start again from the bottom and go this way. So down on the outside, my loop will now go the other way, come up on the inside of the loop. Now I'll be next to that previous row, and this will make the vein of my leaf. So you're tensioning in a different direction now, so I'm now tensioning over to the left so that my buttonhole meets in the middle. Again, remembering to put the angle on that stitch so they look like the veins of the leaves. Try and do it so it looks like the other side, and again just work my way right up to the tip. The last few stitches, they get quite small towards the end, but just keep that rhythm going. Concentrate on the shape of the leaf. Make this the last stitch, and then to finish it off, just down the other side of that stitch to hold it in place, and I'll just weave the ends through on the back. So that's a buttonhole leaf. So this one's a little bit more complicated now, so you can see how I've put two inner dotted lines in, and that will just help guide me in my stitch. So I'm going to start on the point, and just take a small stitch on the left hand side of that outline. You can do it on the right hand side first, it doesn't really matter which, and you won't see the pattern going until I've done a few stitches. So I'm just going to come up inside that loop as if I was doing a detached chain and pull that tight. Right, so I came up on the left, now I'm going down on the right. I'm going to start to follow those inner lines, so I'm going to come up on the right hand inner dotted line inside my loop. Down on the left hand side, make my loop, come up on the left hand dotted line. So quite close together. This is closed Cretan, so there's no spaces. Down on the right hand side, make my loop, come up on the right hand dotted line. So it's worth putting those lines in so you can see where to come up and down. So down on the left, make the loop, up on the left. So as long as you remember down and up on the same side, you should be okay. You can start to see that pattern coming now where they cross in the middle. So down on the right, up on the right, and as we go down the shape this pattern gets wider and wider, and then it will get narrower again. So I'll do a few more. Down on the left, up on the left, and follow that line and you'll get a nice shape in the centre. On the right, and that's coming up right next to that previous stitch, so there are no spaces. Tension down towards the bottom of the leaf, and just keep going in a similar manner, and it gets easier as you widen out. It's just that starting bit that's a bit tricky. Now I can clearly see where I need to come up and down, so going to follow this all the way down, and this does take a lot of thread, so I will show you how to start and stop your thread on this one. So I shall keep going and then show you how to change threads. Okay, so I'm running out now. I'll do one more stitch. Let's come down on the right, up on the right, and then you just need to finish that off because it's not attached to anything. So I'm just going to stitch over the top of that, and that will secure that one in place. Finish that thread off, 2 small stitches. You can weave it through on the back instead if you like, whichever way suits you. That off, so get that out of the way. And I've got my new thread started, and I need to come up where I finished. So we did our little finishing stitch there, so I'm just going to come up inside that and you'll see what happens. So then it's down on the left, up on the left, and that's just as if we've continued then. That will cover that stitch. So if you do one more on the right, next to that one, and that's just as if I've carried on. So all the way to the bottom now, and then I'll add my little stem on. Now as I get close to the bottom, those inner lines get close together, so it is literally going to meet at the point. I'm going to take that over the top to finish that stitch, and I've got these 2 little shapes left at the side, so all I'm going to do with those is just some straight satin stitches just to make that leaf shape nice and round at the bottom. So just up and down, filling in that shape. Another tiny little one on the end, get that really nice round curve on there. I'm going to get another little bit of thread just to finish off that last one. So the last few straight stitches, it's just keeping that pattern going. I know I'm not crossing in the middle, but it's just continuing the same effect on the outside, and it just means I can create a nicer shape bottom, and then put a little stem in. I think we'll just do a back stitch for this one. Let's get the knot out the way. one more stitch there. So it is a more complicated one, this one, but you can see how beautiful that crossover is in the middle, and if you make this wider you get more of a crossover, narrow, and get a finer vein, so you can choose how you want that to look. So that's a closed Cretan stitch. So the easiest way to work this stitch is to draw a line down the centre of your leaf where you want your vein to be, because this stitch is going to cross over that central vein. So I'm starting in the point. I'm going to just do a small straight stitch, that will give me a nice sharp point, and I'm going to come up on the left very close to it, and then crossing over that stitch, which will cross over that central vein. Just a short stitch initially while you get going. It's only a small space at the top. Then up on the right, and I'm going to do the same. So I'm going to cross over that previous stitch and just cross over that central line there onto the left hand side. So up on the left, cross over that line down on the right of that central line, and you should find that each stitch follows the direction of the previous one. So once you've got the first few in, I don't want it to cross the previous stitch as well, I just want it to cross the stitch on the other side. So up on the left, try and get that edge nice and neat, crossing over parallel with that previous stitch, going from left to right. It makes a nice crossing pattern in the centre. So you can line it up with that previous one, not in that direction because there's a gap, not over the top, so parallel with that previous stitch that's going in the same direction, cross over the middle, and just work your way down the whole shape doing the same thing, nice and close together so there's no gaps. Concentrate on getting the edge nice and smooth, and the middle should take care of itself. We'll get to the point at the bottom where you can't really cross over anymore, so I think we'll just about get away with that one, right on the edge. And then if you want to again add a few extra stitches just to enhance the shape of the leaf, just continue the sort of pattern, so the straight stitch coming down towards the centre. Just put another one in there, just to make that leaf shape finished. And again, just a little stem on the bottom. Leaves always look better with a joining stem. They look like they should be fixed to something, so I'll just do a back stitch again just to finish that off. So a really pretty one, that makes a really natural leaf shape, and that's fishbone stitch. So far I've just used one colour for each leaf, but now I'm going to actually mix some strands in my needle of different colours. So I've got 4 strands of a stranded cotton or a stranded floss, and I've got 2 lighter green and 2 sort of mid-green, and I've just put those together in the needle, and that will give me a nice effect all on its own. So I can concentrate on the stitch and just let the colours do their own thing. So I'm just doing a satin stitch, so this is just straight stitches. I'm going to just curve them around slightly as I go down, so I'm starting vertical at the top, and I'm just going to angle them in just to get around that corner. If there's a little gap, don't worry, you can come back and fill that in. And I've just marked on some lines where I want my stitches to lie, so that's the angle I'd like them to be at by the time I get to that line. So I'm just going to turn them slightly, so a bit wider at the top, nice and close together near the centre there, and they'll just swing round nicely. So by the time I get to my line, I'm going in the right direction. So there we go, so one on the line. I'm just sort of going up to that central vein as close as I can without going on it, because I want the other side to meet it. And if there's any little gaps at this stage, you can just go back in and slide your needle between them and fill those in, so you can get a really nice full leaf here. Put tiny little ones in if you need to, just to get around those corners. And then it's the same angle more or less now to the bottom. The leaf's turning a little bit to the right, so we may have to turn just very small amounts. You can see that nice colour that leaf is coming out just by having these two different shades of green in the needle. And I've got quite similar shades, so this one will be subtle, but you could make it more contrasting if you wanted to. Put a darker shade in there with it. So you can see I'm reaching this second line now. And I'm at the same angle, which I'm happy about, so I should just keep going all the way down. So needle comes straight up on the edge, down in the centre, so just nice smooth straight stitches. Try and get that edge as neat as you can. Just use a fair amount of thread because you're going round and round the leaf on the back as well, so you will need quite a few strands for this one. So I should just finish that off. We're covering the whole shape, so I can just finish my thread inside that shape, or you can turn your frame over and weave it through on the back, whichever you prefer. Get those ends out of the way. Start my second set of colours. So I'm going to go all the way to the bottom, then I'll go up the other side, and then we'll put something for the stem. So I've just come up the other side now. If you want to start a new thread and come back down from the top, that's fine. I just went round the bottom and continued up. And then these stitches on the right hand side should now meet the ones on the left hand side, so making sure they sort of touch, which forms the centre. There, so there's my last guide. So if you're a little bit away from that, you can make some adjustments. Go close together at the top, a bit wider at the bottom, and that will swing me around. There we go. And then those last stitches now, if you want to, you can put that middle one in, because I know that needs to be that angle, and you can fill in around it if you find that easier, just so those stitches turn nicely around the top, and then just go back and fill in the gaps. That works quite well. One at the top, I'm just sliding my needle between those stitches so it looks like they're all, that's okay, I'm happy with that. Now I don't think it needs a stem, but you can put one in if you want to. I will put this one in at the bottom. I'm just stepping my thread down to the bottom so it's not a long stitch on the back, so between those threads there. And you could go back and put one down the whole of the centre, but I quite like that natural vein down the middle there. So I'm just going to put a little back stitch on the bottom, back stitch or a stem stitch or a whipped back stitch. Any of those are nice to make a nice fine stem. So last two stitches. If you wanted to make it a bit thicker, you can just whip your thread around that, so you go under each stitch from the same direction each time, whipping the thread around those stitches. That sort of smooths it out a bit and makes it a nice sturdy stem. So there we go, a simple satin stitch in two different colours of green. So we've had a go at mixing some colours in the needle. Now I'm going to show you what happens if you use a variegated one. So this is a skein of thread that changes throughout the thread from one colour to another. So quite a subtle one. This is a DMC one, but you can get them in lots of different brands as well. So we're just going to try this one and see what this looks like. I'm going to do bullion knots. So I'm going to start in the tip to make my nice sharp point and do one straight down the middle. So I've come up where I want to start, down where I want the knots finished, back up where I started, but don't pull the needle through, and just wrap that needle as many times as you need to until the knots or the wraps meet the other thread coming out the other side. This is the tricky bit. So then you sort of hold those in your left hand and you wiggle the needle through and then pull it tight. Now it'll look a bit messy at this stage, but don't worry about that. I'm going to pull that out, so I've got that triangle, put my needle in the triangle, lift it up, and then you can just tease those knots. You can push them up with your finger. I just like to run the needle underneath them to smooth them out a little bit. Pull this thread down till this tightens up. And just keep fiddling with it until you're happy with it. People usually stop a bit too soon with these and they don't look quite right, so take your time just to make sure those wraps are nice and even. And there's my bullion knot. I just need to secure the end so the needle goes down at the end. Now we do have a comprehensive video on these knots telling you how to do them, so do check that out. I won't go into too much detail here, but that one does tell you all about how to do them and how to avoid any problems you might have, because they are a little bit tricky. I'll just do a couple more. So wrap the thread, doesn't matter which way round you wrap it, till it meets that other end. Pull the needle through the knots. Just wiggle them through if they won't come. Pull the thread all the way up till it's tight. Got this messy looking triangle. Needle goes in the triangle and just tighten them up. So just sort of rub that underneath. You can push it with your finger. Just keep doing that process until all these threads are tight. Take your needle down at the end and pull that thread all the way through. Now you can see that I've marked on some directions again, so I'm going to try and do them in those directions so that they look like the veins on a leaf. So they will get shorter, that top one's a bit longer, so just do the number of wraps that you need. Keep fiddling and pulling it tighter and just evening out those coils till you're happy with that. Take the needle through to the back and pull it tight. So I'm going to work all the way down here with my knots and all the way up the other side, and then we'll have a look and see what that looks like. Do my last one here. Squeeze it in the top. Wrap my needle just a couple of times for this one. So these bullion knots do take a little bit to get the hang of, so practice them first if you're not familiar with them. We've got, like I say, video on all about just the knot, so do check that one out. Let's squeeze that last one in there. Really nice in the different colours actually. There we go. And a really nice textured one this, so great one if you want something that stands up a little bit more. So that's a bullion knot leaf. So this stitch consists of 2 stitches actually, so we're going to work around the edge first a back stitch, and then through this back stitch we'll weave our herringbone stitch. So it's quite important that these are as even a length as possible, and this works better on a shape that's symmetrical. Too much sort of twisting and turning looks nice, but this one is a little bit harder on that sort of shape. So a good one if you've got a straight leaf, and if you can, and this is the tricky bit, try and get the back stitches the same down the other side, or roughly. So the more accurate you are with your stitch length, the easier you will find this. So don't worry too much, but if you can get them the nice even length, the next part will be easier. So I'm just coming down the right hand side now, back to where I started. And you could use two different colours. I'm going to use the same colour for this, but you could use two different ones. And I'm using just 4 strands for this back stitch, and then I'm going to use 6 to weave through it. This is quite an open looking stitch, so you will see through the middle of it, so that's something to bear in mind. So we're nearly at the bottom, a couple more stitches. And then I think while I'm here, I will just put my little stem in. So I'm at the bottom and I have my needle in, so I'll just keep going with that back stitch. And I quite like the whipped one, so I'm going to come up at the end and just whip the thread around those back stitches like so. Finish that off on the back later. So I'm going to bring now my 6 strands in. Just put my knot out the way at the bottom, that will get cut off. Now the top will be fairly solid, so I'm just going to put my starting stitches just near the top. I'm going to come up in the point. Doesn't matter which side you start with first. I'm going to start on the left side, and I come underneath that first back stitch, and before you pull that loop through, you just put your needle through that loop and then pull it tight. And this is another one where you'll see the pattern emerge as we go down the leaf shape. So the same on the other side now, so underneath the right hand side, before you pull that loop through, it's a bit twisted, just put your needle through the loop to the other side. Now we take the next back stitch. You can see now why they need to be nice and even. Underneath the loop, and underneath that back stitch, so just taking the next one each time. Try not to go through the fabric, I'm just going under the stitch, through the loop before you pull it tight. And this is the herringbone part. Now don't pull these too tight because you can pull the leaf out of shape, so nice even tension on this. Work my way all the way down. Needle goes underneath that loop first. It's a bit harder to start and stop this one, so I've got a longer thread than I would normally use, which makes it a little bit harder to stitch, but it just means I haven't got to work out how to stop and start, which can be a bit tricky. You could stop when you go underneath this stitch here and just take it through to the back, but it goes under there. You start to get this sort of lace pattern, which is really very beautiful. So all the way to the bottom, going underneath those back stitches on the edge each time, and the needle goes inside the loop before you come back across. Get that knot out of the way. So all the way to the bottom to finish off. So just coming to the end now. If you should find you've got more back stitches one side than the other and you need to go around one of them twice in order to make this nice and even, that's fine, nobody's going to notice. Promise. Keep it going all the way to the bottom. too tight on that tension, so we've got one more to get round. And then just going to finish that in the centre. That makes that beautiful lace effect. So just watch your tension on that one. Make sure you've got a piece of thread long enough. And that's a herringbone ladder stitch. So for this one, I've actually got a leaf from my garden and I thought we will roughly follow it. So I'm going to do this in 2 colours. And you can see I've just marked on a rough shape for the inside colour here. So I'm going to do a light green and a dark green. So I should keep that to hand just off screen. So I'm going to use that variegated one again, and I'm using 2 strands, and I've actually turned them the opposite way so that they mix even more, so I don't get quite so much stripes as I got with the bullion knots. And I'm going to work the yellow areas first. I'm going to work round the edge in the yellow and then bring the dark green in. So I'm doing 2 strands, and I'm going to just come up on the inside and down the edge. Now I'm not too worried about my edge being smooth because these leaves don't have a smooth edge. So if you're working from an actual leaf, look and see what the leaf actually does and try and replicate that. So I'm going to just not worry too much about the lengths of my stitches either, just vary them a little bit, a longer one and a bit of a shorter one, and each stitch next to the previous stitch. It doesn't matter if I go into this shape because these stitches will overlap. So slightly shorter one, it's really long and not so long rather than long and short, and just turning them slightly as I go around because my leaf's got a bit of a curve to it. Before I go too far down that side, I'm going to pick up this side and come down and meet it. Slightly longer one and a bit of a shorter one. See, I'm not being too precise with this. I'm just going to keep going around with my lighter greeny yellow thread. Now, just angling those stitches so they come in towards the centre of the leaf a little bit. That gives it a nice natural look. If I just go straight down with them all, it doesn't look like a leaf. So you can see how I've been down both sides with this colour, just angling everything into this point here. Aim for the point at which the leaf would naturally grow from. And I've made a rough kind of shape in the middle. And I'm just going to go back to the top and put a couple more in here. Now that I'm mixing, I'm coming out of my stitch and down into the fabric. That just helps to blend the colours nicely. Just a couple of stitches just to bring that yellow a bit further down. The leaf's got quite a lot of yellow at the top. So just to make it a bit more realistic. So we've done fairly stylised leaves till now, so this is a good one to use if you want to do something that looks a bit more like an actual leaf. I'm just going to break up that line down the side a bit with a couple of longer ones just to make it a bit more interesting shape. Finish that thread off. I'm going to bring in my darker thread. And again, coming out of the stitches, I'm coming a good way back into the stitches, That make them blend nicely. If I come right at the end here, I kind of end up with some gaps, so you can come right into these stitches, and everything is heading for this point here. So if you just imagine that stitch heading for there, and that's where you take it through to the fabric. That's the easiest way to think of it. And alternating where I come out, so I don't end up with a line of dark stitches. So one quite high up, low down, quite high up, quite low down. And just vary that, which make for a much more natural looking blend in your colours. Just heading down the side of the shape. And stopping near to the middle vein. This leaf in particular has a very pale vein right at the centre, so I might come in and put that in with a light thread, so I'll leave myself a bit of space. Just going to go all the way to the bottom as before. And I'm going to do the other side. I can come in and fill any gaps afterwards, don't worry about those. Just sort of work quite methodically around the shape. So I've been all the way round back to the top, so that's kind of my second row, and then I just want to fill in this last little bit of space here in the dark again. Still heading for that point at the bottom of the leaf. And I'm just going to work to that sort of centre line there. They can meet, and I'll put some stitches over that to make the vein. So everything heading downwards and up to the centre now, just filling in those gaps, still varying where I come out of the stitches so I don't get a line of stitching. And if you get colours similar to each other, they will blend nicely. So if you're doing this for the first time, get two similar colours and you'll find that helps you. So going back up the other side now, I want to come right up to that previous row on the other side now, fill in these gaps. You can see how nicely they're blending together. Works really nice with that variegated one on the outside. So just filling in any last little spaces with the dark green. You can do more colours if you want to get a bit more detailed with your leaf, but 2 is a good number to start with if you're learning this, and pretty effective, I think. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'll finish that thread off on the back, and then I'm just going to bring in my light yellow to do the stem. I should do a stem stitch for this. Going to go right up into the leaf as the actual leaf comes up into this dark green. So just stitching right over the top of any stitches that are there. I'm not worried about finding a gap, just stitch straight over them. Just going to finish that there, and then just a couple of little things at the bottom. Just feel it needs a couple more stitches down there just to round off the bottom nicely. I think one more on the other side. Like so, and then I'll just weave my threads through on the back, and that is a long and short leaf. So this is like a kind of a satin stitch, and then we're going to put some stitches over the top to secure these long stitches in place. And what I'm going to do with this one, instead of going round and round the fabric like we did for satin stitch, I'm going to come up and down next to where I went in. So we're just laying these threads down, and I'm going to sort of do it in a fan shape around the leaf. Now this uses a lot less thread than a satin stitch does, and it's for sort of bigger shapes. So if you want a larger leaf area, then this is a good one for that. And because I'm coming up and down the same side, I'm not using anywhere near so much thread. Now what can happen is the edge isn't so neat, so you may want to put a stitch around the edge afterwards, but you can see what it looks like and whether you like that or not. Just angling them slightly. For this you would normally just go straight across, but I think it doesn't look quite so natural. So if I just angle it a little bit, I think that suits a leaf shape better, but only slightly. Don't worry that these stitches are really long, because we're going to hold them down. Fills in nice and quickly, so again, if you've got a larger shape and you want something to go in a bit faster, this is a good one. So I'm using 6 strands of stranded cotton. That's one side, so I'm going to go around the other side and fill that in, and then show you how to stitch the holding stitches. Okay, so we've got our laid stitches in, and you can see they're quite long and they do move around. They're not very secure, so we're going to put some stitches over the top just to hold those in place. I'm going to be a bit freestyle with this, but you could work it out on a piece of paper first if you wanted to. And the idea is that these stitches will hold down the stitches underneath, so you need to cover quite a few of them. So I'm coming straight up out of the stitches. I don't want to move them. I'm going to make a sort of vein pattern. So straight up and straight down with my needle. You don't want these to move with the needle so that there's a gap in them. So I'm coming straight up from through those stitches or between them, it doesn't matter, whichever works out nicely. Just putting some veins in, you can see how that's holding down what's underneath. I'll go back to the bottom and do the same the other side, so everything should be held down at some point that's quite long. So I'm making these stitches fairly large. Come over here, these are long ones across here, so I need to hold that down, so put a stitch over that there. Last few stitches in just to make them look like veins. There we go. I'm confident that everything is fastened down. It's going to move, so I can finish that off on the back. Cut my knot off. And there's the final stitch. So I hope you've enjoyed this video on 10 different stitches to stitch lees. If you've liked it, do give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the little bell for notifications. And don't forget the download as well. If you would like to have a go at these, is in the description below. Just click on the link and we'll see you in the next video.